Awesome.
It's time for episode 99 of The Crisis Show here on Google Hangouts and YouTube and wherever else you have this link around the world. And we hope it's the right link. We're sorry we're a little late today. We had some technical difficulties. Good evening from New York. My name is Rich Klein. I'm president of Rich Klein Crisis Management and founder and host of The Crisis Show. I have a great panel tonight. We're going to talk about this controversy that has moved around the country regarding the Religious Freedom Restoration Act in Indiana and Arkansas and other places. It's caused a lot of pressure on the governor there, Mike Pence, and the crisis for him goes further because it affects a lot of lobbying groups and puts pressure on presidential candidates and the business community and, of course, the state of Indiana as well. And there have been boycotts of the state already announced by a few governors. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. With me and joining me, I'm so thrilled to have them. First of all, from Concord, California, a regular on the show. He is the founder of Holtz Plus Communication and one of the people on For Media Release, Shel Holtz. How are you, Shel?
I'm doing well, Rich. Thanks. How are you?
Good, thank you. Better now that we're connected. And from Las Vegas, a wonderful guest, another regular, real public affairs expert who can talk about this from a Republican standpoint, my good friend Greg Brooks. Hi, Greg.
Nice to be here.
Good to see you. And a rookie, but not only a rookie to the show, but not a rookie to this world. His name is Olivier Blanchard, a social media expert, a branding and a marketing expert out of South Carolina. Nice to see you, Olivier.
Nice to be here.
Good. So, folks, actually, Greg, why don't you maybe get us started on this and give us a setup piece about what the strategy of this legislation, what was behind it, do you think, and then we'll get into how Mike Pence has dealt with it and the rest of the country.
Well, if you zoom out to the national level, this law is at the confluence of several things. One is the rapid change in public opinion and rapid adoption of gay marriage around the country, combined with the recent Hobby Lobby decision by the Supreme Court, and a feeling, rightly or wrongly, among traditional social conservatives that their beliefs are being hemmed in. So against that backdrop, there are groups who attempt to put in place at the state level and at local levels around the country laws that will protect their beliefs. A lot of times we'll talk with fiscally conservative issues about ALEC and the role they play in these sorts of things. There are organizations that do similar things with social conservative issues. This one happened to blow up because it does expand the protections afforded under these laws compared to similar laws, and we are in an age of outrage when any sort of attempted rollback of the recent gains is seen as a very bad thing.
Now, Greg, you follow Republicans around the country. Do you think that the General Assembly of Indiana put a lot of thought into this reaction? Do you think they thought about it? Do you think they cared? And how do you think they've handled it so far?
Well, I hesitate to say any legislator put a lot of thought into anything because there's a lot of evidence to the contrary, right? But if you follow the dictum of vote your district, vote your conscience, from an Indiana Republican legislator's perspective, the problem here is not the legislation. The problem is that the rest of the world noticed the legislation. I have no doubt that a majority of Indiana residents would probably be fine with the legislation as presented. But now we've got the rest of the world watching, and they're forced, in particular Governor Pence is forced to step it back a bit.
Olivier, you are one of those people, I know you wrote a piece about this, really insightful piece, in depth, with a lot of links and background. Give us your take on this And also, I'd like you to chime in on, because you are a social media expert, what you're seeing in the social media space about this.
Right. Well, I mean, being a social media expert is kind of like being an expert at nothing. So let's just say that I'm a marketing guy with a.
Well, you got 50,000 followers, so that's good enough for me.
Right. Yeah.
Go ahead.
You know, I don't know how that
I
happens.
think it's a social media veteran.
I guess I'm missing something, but go ahead.
No, it's good. No, I'm a marketing guy. So in what I do, yeah, PR is definitely part of the toolkit, and social channels are definitely part of the ecosystem. So when you bring it all together, the one thing that you've probably noticed about social media is that on the one hand, it's a great kind of ecosystem on which ideally the best ideas would be shared, and there would be some kind of like digital Darwinism where the best ideas and the best debates would rise to the top. And unfortunately, what we're seeing with social media for the most part is the exact opposite, where now that everyone has a voice, although it's great to have democratized that, we're also finding out that a very large number of people talk more than they think on both sides of the aisle. And so, Greg mentioned the outrage, or the age of outrage, and there's definitely an outrage machine going on that's very short-lived, that doesn't really aim to do anything except feed itself. And most of the conversations, or most of the content that's being pushed on social media is so rooted in partisanship that you have one side basically defending the position and yelling at the other side, and then you have the other side defending the opposite position and throwing accusations that aren't necessarily exact or accurate, and also yelling at the other side. And there's not really that much dialogue. There's more argument, and because of that, and because there's no mediation, it's just basically people yelling at each other about the wrong things and not coming to some kind of consensus, or at least some agreement on what the issues actually are, and then having a debate about that. And unfortunately, that's one of the great failures of digital channels, at least up to this point.
Shel, I know. Shel, Greg, did you want to jump on that for a second?
Only to the extent that 2 points. One is I can't thank Olivier enough for bringing up this notion that the promise of online communications was that we'd have 1,000 lenses through which to view the world, and what we ended up with was 1,000 mirrors that we could reflect our own closely held opinions back. The other is that politically, that works really well for people. If you're somebody in power, what's the best way to stay in power? You give the people an enemy, and social channels and the age of outrage give a near infinite amount of enemies for those in power, or those who want to be in power, to throw at their base and keep them worked up.
Yeah. And let me just stick with this thread for a minute, because what I think is interesting is that this age of outrage is not confined to politics. We've seen the outrage bubble up over the just named new host of The Daily Show over some tweets that he delivered. I mean, Justine Sacco's life was ruined because of outrage over her attempt to be edgy with a tweet. And most of what we hear projected back through the media and coverage of these issues is coming from Twitter, which is more of a broadcast medium than a discussion medium. So it's people shouting out to everybody. I can't speak for everybody else's Facebook feed, but I tend to put together a collection of people who do have reasoned discussions from both sides of the aisles, until one or two of my friends jump in with hyperbole, and everybody else goes, I don't want to be part of this. But yeah, I think this age of outrage, the age of outrage extends to brands introducing new logos, for goodness sake. So yeah, I just want to make the point, I don't think this is confined to politics, but politicians and their handlers certainly know how to leverage it.
Well, let me pose this question to anyone and all of you. What do you think it was that brought Mike Pence to the point of saying, wait a second, I got to go on This Week with George Stephanopoulos. I got to get out there and defend my position. Because, I wonder if that would have happened, 10, 15 years ago before social media, or was it the lobbying groups from the gay lesbian community that got on him? What do you think it was? That
No. Look, call me cynical, but Mike Pence does not care about the lobbying from the gay and the lesbian groups. Mike Pence cares about lobbying from the people who can donate to his governor's re-election.
Right. I hear you. Yeah.
And those people express some concern.
So his colleagues on the right, or the Republicans, you're saying, were the ones that said, hey, maybe you better get out there?
Yeah, you don't hear from them as much, but there really is this large swath in business of Republicans, or if you want to be more delicate, just say center-right folks, who don't want to go down this deeply social conservative route. Those people have noise, they've got the energy, but they don't necessarily reflect a majority of the party. The people in the party who have capital at stake want workable solutions. And what bubbled up out of this controversy was that the law as it stood was not a workable solution. And they presented that information to Governor Pence.
All right. But my question back to the group is, why then, and understanding this, and I agree with everything you just said, why then did pretty much every single GOP presidential hopeful speak up in favor of the bill, even though the tide had already shifted in public opinion regarding that?
Because right now they're running for the base, they're not running for the general populace. And within the base, that's a reasonably safe position to take. The only people paying attention to the GOP race right now are the same people who add me to 5 Ted Cruz groups a week on Facebook against my will. Those people, they don't care about the subtleties.
Right. No, but it's just in relation to the vast majority of say, at least fiscal conservatives or conservatives in general, who tend to be in that center-right group that we don't hear about, that kind of silent majority maybe. If they're really the power block in terms of funding and support necessarily for a candidate, why then focus on the minority fringe instead of focusing, or at least trying to edge yourself towards that more, not necessarily towards the national election yet, because it is still primary season, but at least towards that bucket of center-right, fiscally conservative Republicans who don't necessarily want to go down this weird road?
I don't have an answer for you. I was unhappy with all of the GOP presidential hopeful responses that I saw, and I didn't see all of them, but the ones that I saw were so short and meaningless as to cause more problems than they solved. It's almost a dog whistle effect. Yeah, I understand this. I'm sensitive to your pain. Let's move on. It's a winning strategy for them at this moment. You know, the fiscal bloc of the GOP, I think, understands to a certain degree that right now a lot of this noise is just what you have to put up with until you narrow the field, and then when you narrow the field, then you can press them harder on fiscal issues and sort of carve out the differences on that front. They're at least in my experience, the folks who are engaged in genuine free market reforms, fiscal reforms within the GOP, they're playing a quieter ground game that's less involved in grassroots and much more involved in policy reform. And so it's really a different animal.
Right. But that's not as exciting though. It's not. It doesn't. There's no passion there. It's more pragmatic.
No. Well, and you know, I
don't think there's any hashtags around that stuff.
Yeah, you ought to see us get down with a 50-page policy report. Come on.
Yeah, gentlemen, I want to focus the discussion now on the crisis communications part of this, which is, I just found it interesting from the kind of work that I do, media training and advising people on, get your messaging right and how to deal with the media. So Mike Pence, he goes on This Week with George Stephanopoulos. So from my standpoint, good idea to go out there and defend your position, whatever your side of the position you're on. But he made a lot of mistakes, and he admitted himself he made a lot of mistakes, which then led to a press conference, a press conference in which he attacked the media. So he attacked the dog that he attacked the people who feed you, and then he put out all these adjectives about shameless and tolerance goes two ways. And I just thought he destroyed himself from a communication standpoint. And I wonder what you guys thought of that. I mean, as I said, I think it's good not to hide from the media, but before you go out there, you got to know what you're going to say and make sure you've thought about it. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I saw Ashley Banfield, of all people, lash out at him for blaming the media, pointing out all the criticism that was coming from other quarters, including the mayor of Indianapolis, who's a Republican mayor. It's a mistake to go on the attack when you are the focal point of a crisis. It's not what people want to hear. For one thing, they want to know how you're going to fix this. For the people who feel at risk, and this is true in any crisis. We've talked about this on the show before, Rich. People want to know that the risk is going to be reduced and removed. They want to know how it's going to be avoided in the future. So blaming others for your problem doesn't solve the problem. Might make you feel better to get it off your chest, but under no circumstances, no matter who it is you're blaming, it's not going to solve the problem. The problem is that people feel that they have been hurt or are at risk as a result of what happened, and they want to know what you're going to do about it.
Greg, what do you think about that? What did you think of the response?
Look, I would love to, I like Pence and I like the things he's done, so I want to believe that there's a stack of polling numbers somewhere and a super evil genius plan that made all these things that look so very bad come together. But I haven't seen that. And he absolutely cratered in every media appearance I saw. Showing up and finger wagging the media when your story blows national? No. I mean, he talked too much and he talked about the wrong things. All he needed to do was to say, clearly there are some concerns here. We want to address those concerns. I'm asking the legislature to get back at this bill and get something to me at the end of the week. And then shut up. Or if you're not going to shut up, give people updates on a day-by-day basis. Yeah. But don't start acting like, oh, woe is me, the media doesn't understand my brilliant policy.
See, that's what I wanted to ask you, because the thing you mentioned earlier about who are people talking to? Was Mike Pence really talking to the people who are not going to finance his campaigns, or was Mike Pence talking to the people who do? And if you follow that logic, however flawed it may be, then you get into a mode in which the script that's driving his response is really aimed at his base, once again.
Right.
And so blaming the liberal mainstream media for creating a fake scandal over a law that, according to the narrative, is identical to the 1993 law and has never been a problem before, was the narrative that he decided to go with and his advisors advised him to go with. Unfortunately, that was dubious in regards to the facts. His handlers didn't help him in regards to the opposition research that obviously was very flawed and not done properly. And they didn't practice the hard questions with him to try to figure out an answer to the obvious question. And so refusing to answer the question and trying to pivot just doesn't work in this context. And those were the errors. But I think the initial plan had to have been to follow the, and I don't mean to be derogatory or judgmental in any way, but follow a more typical Fox News type of narrative that immediately attacks liberal media and the left-wing outrage machine.
Look, Fox News was reporting just 24 hours ago that this could help Pence down the road. And it's like, so yeah,
right.
I'm not sure in what circle of hell he's going to run for dog catcher, but yeah, okay, maybe it'll help him.
I think one of the things that really surprises me is that the Indiana legislature apparently thought that they could slip this by quietly, based on the fact that 26 other states already have similar laws, although they don't contain the provision that everybody pounced on with this one. And therefore, there was no plan for communicating when it blew up. You could tell that they were exercising knee-jerk reaction and didn't have a plan to address this.
And that's very common.
Oh, of course it is, but that doesn't make it any less distressing.
It wasn't just Pence. I saw some other interviews, Lieutenant Governor, the Speaker there. All of them sounded knee-jerk. They were scrambling for the right answer, all in different messages. You know, the other thing I want to mention, gentlemen, is I used to work in Albany, so I covered, Mario Cuomo, I covered Hugh Carey as a reporter, and so when I watch governors, it's always interesting to me. And what I discerned from this is that you have to know who your audience is. Once Mike Pence is in front of a national media, it's very different than talking to your base. And the messaging has to be slightly different than what it might be in the good old hometown. And you guys are right. I don't think his handlers thought about, well, what if you could ask this, and messaged against the what became a very angry public opinion in a lot of parts of the country.
Yeah, the problem was that he was completely on message. The problem was that it was the wrong message for a national audience, and they didn't catch that for the first 48 hours.
Exactly. Yeah, so this has also moved on now to Arkansas, and I wonder if, that's probably, I imagine, going to be a gift for Mike Pence if this goes to other states beyond. Right now, it's still a lot of attention in Indiana. There was one question I did want to ask you guys. We're talking about Mike Pence, but the bigger issue here from a PR standpoint for the state of Indiana, for the people that are now saying they're going to boycott the state, they don't want to hold conventions there. Of course, the NCAA is going to stay there. It's too late for that. But what do you guys think about the impact on the business community? Is there going to be an uproar from them against the governor's office? Hey, we're trying to make a living here. If these conferences leave our state, what happens? Or do you think that's just people's fears? Anybody would jump in on that?
Well, I look, the person running the Indiana Visitor and Convention Bureau is having a pretty damn bad day today and yesterday and the day before. But their concerns cannot and should not necessarily drive the concerns of the state's political machine. I think that for every announcement that somebody's not going to come to the state, there's a little bit of finger pointing saying, you see, but even in a state like Indiana, which is very largely rural, it's Indiana and a lot of corn. I lived there. Indianapolis and a lot of corn. This is a drop in the bucket of the state's economy. You never want to lose anything, but we shouldn't conflate these announcements with wholesale devolution of the Indiana economy.
Of course, I guess what I'm trying to get at, Greg, is for the people who are just running small businesses there, who are concerned, they're going to maybe they have a big stake in an upcoming convention there, and how does Pence deal with that? How does his administration and General Assembly deal with that? And does that influence their stance on this legislation at all, or the amendment?
Well, I suspect they're getting calls from constituents because this is dominating the news cycle. Angie's List is not going to build out their facility there, and Amazon, Jeff Bezos has made a statement. You're talking about very recognizable businesses, and the constituents see this and they pick up their phone and they call their assemblyman or their state senator, and that's where votes come from. This is why the court of public opinion is so ridiculously important. It's why lobbying groups spend more on PR than they do on lobbying. So, I think there's an impact on all of these, even if the actual monetary impact on the Indiana economy isn't as great as it sounds like as you read this constant, flood of businesses that have made statements about their future activities in the state.
Any thoughts on that? Do you want to jump in?
Yeah. So I live in a red state, so this is the sort of thing in a very, very red state, right? South Carolina, Sarah Palin and Ted Cruz could absolutely become governors here if they wanted to. It's kind of a no-brainer. So this sort of thing could happen here. And the vast majority of the state would be perfectly fine with it, honestly. But some of us wouldn't. And so let's assume that I have a restaurant here and that tourism, at least in the city of Greenville, is probably second only to the city of Charleston, South Carolina. So it's a big deal, and my losing business, either from out-of-state clients or whatever the reason, because of something like this, would have a real impact on me. And it's not something that I could deflect and blame on the economy or blame on Obama or whatever. But no matter what I do, and no matter how much noise I make with my state legislature, if they decide that they want to keep the law where it is and the Department of Justice doesn't get involved and the Supreme Court doesn't get involved, or at least it doesn't for the next 10 years, I really have no recourse. I can either try to ride the wave or move to a different state, or put together some kind of communications program that brands me as not a pro-discrimination or rather pro-discrimination defense, rather proponent. But I don't know. The only other thing, the only other recourse, I think, which is possible, and it might be part of that evil mastermind math that we were talking about earlier, is that understanding how short the news cycle is and how quickly we go from one outrage to the other. We're kind of like outrage addicts. Yeah. This story might be nowhere a week from now. And all of the contracts already in place for events going on for the next few years, so different conferences and races and what have you, the impact of the boycotts might not actually be felt for 4, 5, 6 years. And if we forget about this in 2 weeks and there's no real impact in people's pockets for many years, there's not really going to be ultimately any pressure to make a change anytime soon. And it's entirely possible that the people controlling this entire process might have already done the math and figured, okay, we're going to have a really bad week. But it doesn't matter, because by the time any impact whatsoever comes our way, we'll have moved on to something else. And maybe the political situation in the country will be very different.
Yeah, I guess what I talk about on the show very often is a crisis in one place can become a potential crisis elsewhere. So certainly I imagine right now legislators and governors in other states are looking at their own statutes on this issue, and this certainly it's a great case study. It's always good to have a heads up of if it hasn't hit you yet, some legislation similar has not hit your state yet, you can look at public opinion in Arkansas and in Indiana and say, okay, this is what we have to deal with. You certainly can plan much better, and that's one of the lessons of the show is that use these case studies that are gifts to you before the crisis falls on your doorstep.
Mm-hmm. And if history serves right, I mean, if you look just at the past year alone, a number of governors have made some pretty horrible PR decisions. And some of them are completely absurd that relate to fracking, that relate to banning their officials from using the term climate change. There's been some just really strange, odd decisions that has people up in an uproar, and a week later you don't hear about it. Either it's a punchline and we move on because it's not really serious, or we just forget to care. And I'm sure that somewhere this was a factor in this. I don't think that anybody in Indiana thought that it was going to be as big a deal as it was. Otherwise, they would have been more prepared. They really did seem to be taken by surprise by this. But ultimately, I think they've done the math on this. They've rolled the dice, and they figure that in 2 weeks, if it's a problem, they'll deal with it. But until now, it's just damage control until CNN. I mean, seriously, and I don't mean to make light of this, but until a plane crashes, or a bomb goes off somewhere, or somebody discovers that an email server has disappeared or been found, there's going to be something to take the place of this in the news cycle very quickly.
Yeah, this has really benefited Hillary Clinton. No one's talking about email right now.
Right. The Obama administration as a whole has had an easy week because of it. To the extent there is a grand master plan, legislation like this often bubbles up precisely to go to court case. And we were talking before the show that the solution to this, if you want uniform anti-federalist solution is to amend the Civil Rights Act to include sexual orientation. Easy solution, uniform across the country. That is the last thing the social conservatives want. So this could be a considered opening salvo toward elevating the controversy into the courts.
Interesting. Yeah. And that's the Civil Rights Act of 1964, if I remember that.
That's correct. There are two pieces of federal legislation that fundamentally say if you run a business, you have to accommodate the people coming in the door and serve them. One is the Federal Civil Rights Act, and the other is the American with Disabilities Act. It makes sense to amend the former.
Yeah. Shel, add to that?
No, I think Greg's absolutely right, and I haven't heard anybody at the federal level make a suggestion along those lines. Have you?
I have. It's and I think it's because it would be this past week writ large, and everybody's got things on their plate. This sounds very cynical, but I believe everybody, both sides of the aisle, has things on their plate they would rather accomplish than tackling that.
Well, you know, I mean, the GOP has a majority in the House and the Senate. Given that we're going into a primary season, I don't think that, I mean, this is the last thing they want to be responsible for. They don't want this to land on their lap. It's not their mess. They didn't create it. And now they would be forced to be in a position where either they do the right thing for the country, which is what we were just talking about, or grandstanding in order to be in line with the messaging leading up into the primaries and talking to the more extreme social conservative base. And it would be really difficult for some of them to have worked along the margins of this not being branded a rhino, and suddenly standing against this, and this would drive a wedge at the national level within the GOP, and that is absolutely the last thing that these guys want. So I can understand why they've been pretty mum about it. It would be like opening Pandora's box.
And it's messy. You can be there are several cases where we have very red meat Republican legislators in Congress who come from states where gay marriage has been legalized.
Yeah.
And talk about being between a rock and a hard place on something like that.
This has got to be hard on centrist Democrats who are trying to look toward the primaries in states like South Carolina, where it's a tough road to hoe for a Democrat. So I'm sure they'd rather not be out in front of this issue, championing things that might alienate the people they're trying to pull over to their side.
But although, and I don't have any experience running any campaigns or anything, but I think it would have been interesting to see a more centrist Republican candidate, like maybe Jeb Bush, actually standing apart from the crowd, not staying on script, and even without completely condemning the law, at least defending the spirit of it, but condemning the execution of it, and finding.
Jeb, of course, is the one guy who can't say that because he's already facing attacks from all sides for not being, not being Rambo enough in his. The
irony of conservative politics, yeah.
When you have Rand Paul, who was the closest we were going to get to a libertarian in this cycle, when we have Rand Paul circling around to the social con party line. We kind of know that rational, thoughtful discourse has left the room. We're just responding to what the base tells us to say at that point. And, I say that with no pride. It's just the way it is right now.
Yeah, I feel bad for you guys a little bit on that one.
No, we're still in charge. Don't feel bad.
Yeah.
Hey, Craig, along those lines, I have a question for you. A little bit of sidetrack, but so many presidential candidates on the Republican side. Do you think it's going to be someone who is leading the charge on economic conservatism, or these social issues like the one we spent most of the show talking about in the end?
I think that the only way a Republican gets elected, okay, and I'm putting on my heresy hat now, okay, because I'm going to leave a lot of my fellow travelers by the side of the road with this. We have decades of talking about freedom and liberty in the Republican Party. I have seen the polls. That language doesn't work anymore. And when you hear folks like, God bless him, Ted Cruz trotting out, this stuff, that's not what people care about. The issues these days, the number one issues, are economic security. And so if we're going to win the White House, we need to nominate a candidate who puts economic security issues at the top of the agenda. And so I don't know if we will do that or not, because we're pretty good at the circular firing squad. But that is what I believe we should do.
Interesting. Phil, any thoughts before we start wrapping up?
Well, I just think that we're going to see this fade rather quickly now that Pence has sent it back to the Indiana State Legislature for revision, and Asa Hutchinson in Arkansas has refused to sign in its current form. There's not much to talk about. I think people will continue to shout for a while, but I think it won't be difficult for some other news story to intrude and ramp up the outrage engine afresh.
Yeah, well, just to be clear, I don't think it's a revision. I think it was sort of like an addendum, if you will. And I want to talk about that for a moment as we wrap up, because it seems to me, and I think I tweeted about this the other day, that the idea of having a new bill is really just about, as Mike Pence himself said, perception. It's to appease the angry mob, if you will. But it's not really, it's really going to say, well, we didn't, I think from what I've read so far, it's going to say, well, this does not give you a license to discriminate, wink, wink. And so it seems to me an olive branch, if you will, if there is such a thing here, to the people who are up in arms about it. But I think the original, what I'm reading, this law is going to stand. They're not changing anything. Well, it's more of like a resolution, if you will, from my read of it, Shel.
What I think Pence wouldn't want to do is have this all quiet down, but have people with their eagle eyes watching for what the revision or the addendum is, and then firing everything up again, saying this doesn't change anything.
What's going to happen?
Wouldn't be good. Yeah, that wouldn't be good for Pence and the Republican legislature. So I think they're going to have to look at something of substance. Well, they're not going to have to. They're going to do what they want to do. But if they don't do something substantive, this is just going to ramp up again when the new language appears. If you remember the Toyota sudden acceleration crisis, if things would quiet down and then there would be a new revelation, and it would just...
The lawsuit, right.
Right, it would just ramp up again. Then it would quiet, and then there would be a new revelation. They didn't get all of their cards on the table at once and be done with it. So, if Indiana doesn't want to be done with this, then don't make substantive changes. But if they do, they're going to have to genuinely address the issue because people are paying attention now.
The substantive issue that everyone's talking about is the ability, perceived or real, to discriminate against homosexuals. If they wall that off in the legislation, with some sort of basic language saying nothing herein shall be construed, blah, 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 the hidden payload here is that the law extends to corporations and to private lawsuits as well as government actions. And that, I feel very comfortable saying that's going to make it to court and get tested in court, because that's a really big and new reach. They're taking one Supreme Court precedent and stretching it to fit, and it'll be interesting to see if it does hold up.
And you're talking about Hobby Lobby when you talk about the Hobby Lobby case, for those who may not be aware, right?
Actually, I've been surprised that that what this law actually does ended up being so focused on the equality, marriage equality, really, and the gay discrimination issue. It's one aspect of what it actually kind of allows in a way, in a roundabout way, but it's not really at the center of the real controversy there. So I mean, it was interesting to see that and to see it branded as an anti-gay law when that was definitely a huge part of the intent, but that's really not what the law was. And there are a lot of other ramifications that haven't even been touched by the media on either side, and this was one of them.
I saw an article somebody shared from the 1960s. I can't remember the newspaper, but it was a major daily. After the enactment of the Civil Rights Act, somebody claimed that his denial of service at a cafe to blacks was based on a religious objection.
Yeah.
So essentially, a religious objection would be allowed in your refusal to serve anybody that you feel by serving that person you're violating your faith. And of course, what the law says is that you can use it as a defense in a legal action. So if you refuse to serve me because I'm Jewish and I sue you, or the state sues you on anti-discrimination grounds, you can raise religious objections as a defense. Of course, the court is not obligated to find in favor. You can
That's a key part of the legislation, is that neither the court nor a jury is required for that to be the ultimate test of whether or not the suit can move forward. It's simply a factor when it wasn't allowed to be a factor before.
Right.
Yeah, certainly for those of us like myself and not a lawyer, I wonder if you guys think what you guys think about how the media has covered this, because it's complex. Because you have a state bill, which I read, and I read hundreds of bills in my time. It's kind of confusing to me. And then you have the federal legislation, and then you have these graphs. Okay, here's what the federal RFRA does. Here's what Indiana's does. And what I got out, the one thing that jumped out at me here, which is why I think Indiana's in trouble, or Pence is in trouble, is the fact that the state law in Indiana does not protect gays and lesbians. There's no protection there. And I think that's what got a lot of people's attention.
Well, that's true, but if you listen to some of the interviews, and not just Pence, but other individuals who went into the media and defended the bill, one of the arguments that kept coming back was that, well, listen, first of all, there has never been a case where RFRA was used to discriminate against gays. That was the first thing. So it became a hypothetical problem, and why are we discussing a hypothetical problem when in the entire history of RFRA law, no such thing has ever happened? So that was the first thing. The second one, which was another interesting talking point, was that cities like Indianapolis have very advanced protections for the LGBT community, and they're basically the city of Indianapolis is entirely pro-gay, and so there's no risk of this kind of shifting into a discrimination kind of thing, and so there are ways to try to deflect the question by invoking abstract protections within the state of Indiana specifically that would somehow possibly make it impossible for businesses to discriminate against gays. So that was one of the ways I think that the defense of this law was set up initially, and trying to avoid mentioning that. That it was a discrimination bill, that it had anything to do with gay rights, and always referencing the 1993 law, federal law, as if it were exactly the same law, just applied to a state. And I thought that was an interesting approach, because it assumed that journalists would not do their research. Yeah. That after, like, the first 24 hours, 48 hours, you might be able to pull that off. But the assumption, I think, was that nobody was really going to care that long or care enough to really look into it and find a giant hole with that argument, which was disingenuous.
They're not just assuming journalists aren't reading it. They assume the legislators wouldn't read it.
I also thought it was interesting, gentlemen, that this was actually pretty smart to the extent that it worked with some of the people, which was, hey, Bill Clinton signed the legislation, Chuck Schumer, Democrat from my state, introduced the legislation, right? And then they pinned it on Obama because, well, big surprise there, right? Everything's...
Right. So that's the whole thing. That's the packaging.
Yeah, that was smart strategy, although it fell apart after a couple of years.
Right, and so you have this package of this thing where it's religious freedom and it's the First Amendment. Who could possibly be against that? And by the way, it was actually introduced by Democrats in 1993. So why should anybody have a problem with it? And then the left packaged it as an anti-gay or anti-LGBT law, which wasn't exactly accurate. But that inflamed passions as well, and led to the giant debate that we have over it now. And it worked in kind of a weird way to raise attention for it. But both of those packages of First Amendment, freedom of religion, and anti-gay were actually not particularly honest if you read the fine print on either one of them. So it's interesting to see how packaging backfired on one end and packaging actually did a really good job on the other.
Yeah, Greg, I'm sorry.
Just as an aside, I know it's ancient history, but the Ku Klux Klan achieved its greatest political power in Indiana. Historically, the state was very strong there, and there was a time when not just if you were black, but if you were black or a Jew or a Catholic, you had a pretty damn bad time in Indiana. And even today, if you go through the state, it is very racially segregated at the town level. And so I guess when I circle back to, okay, what made them think this was okay? There's probably a deeper horizon back there of attitudes at play.
Well, one of the things that I find most interesting in this debate, and I'm talking about the whole debate around serving, doing business with, baking a cake for a gay marriage, a gay wedding, kind of what it comes down to. I've done more reading than I have time to do on this issue, and what repeatedly comes up from theologists and experts is that there's nothing in either the Old or the New Testament that says that it's any kind of sin or any kind of violation of religious principles to do that. In fact, just the other day I read a piece that pointed out that the Pharisees were quite upset with Jesus for hanging out with prostitutes and tax collectors because it violated their religious sensibilities, and Jesus' response was that they're going to get into heaven before you do. And the point was that the people who are saying, I'm not going to bake a cake for a gay wedding, are aligning themselves more with the Pharisees' point of view than they are with Jesus's. So I think it's a woeful.
I think it's a little more visceral than that, Shell.
Sorry,
I think it's a little more visceral than that. I agree.
Oh yeah, it definitely is more visceral.
But if you look at the last 5 or 10 years, even let's go back 15 years, we have embraced gay marriage in this country at a speed that we've not embraced any other civil rights change. And I think that laws like this are a reaction to both the speed of the change and the fact that the language of, as little as 5 years ago, the language was about tolerance and inclusion and treating gay marriage like a civil rights issue. And now that many states have gay marriage, the tone among supporters has flipped to a more triumphalist sort of dissent.
Yeah, it's an inevitability, and people are always going to resist an inevitability.
Right. I still try to understand what a gay wedding cake is, because it's like a gay steak.
It's fabulous.
So it's a cake. The only difference between, you don't write happy birthday on it. It's a wedding cake, not a birthday cake. So if anything, I can understand having an objection towards writing some kind of gay message on a birthday cake. But the wedding cake piece, it's going to be the same cake whether you're gay or straight. The only difference is the groom and groom, or bride and groom, or bride and bride little plastic thing that you're going to stick on top, and that can be done separately. So I still try to wrap my mind about what is really that awful about baking a cake for somebody when you have a bakery, regardless of what religion they are or what their political views are or who they're marrying. That still doesn't, nobody has been able to really explain that to me.
Yeah, just as an aside, I'm a part-time photographer, and one of my jobs I got a few months ago was a gay couple, and they wanted they had gotten married and wanted pictures taken in Central Park. Didn't think anything of it, obviously, but it's a new world we live in. I didn't look at the day differently and look at a heterosexual couple. It's work, paid well too. So why would you turn away the money? Is my question.
But the crazy libertarian in me says they should have the freedom to turn away the money if they want to. But that's, now we're into philosophy.
Right.
Right. Okay.
Well, there might actually be levels of this, because baking a cake doesn't require to really do anything except bake a cake and maybe drive it to the right place. Being a photographer involves you being there for 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 hours and being subjected to something that maybe that really offends you. And so I could almost see a difference between serving somebody in a retail capacity and providing services that would actually really truly make you a part of something that you don't agree with.
I guess you could wait right at.
I believe that's where the lawsuit's going to pop up. The first lawsuit we see will bring up that distinction between sort of immersion in the event versus a brief transactional episode.
Yeah. And that's a fair point. I mean, I still don't see the problem, but I understand where there's a difference between those two situations.
You know, there's also some good material out there I didn't get to include in the show where this idea of religious freedom has been good for a lot of people. And I think one of the weaknesses, just to circle back to the beginning of the show, the media actually did a good job of this, but Mike Pence and his supporters did a lousy job of it, is pointing out all those other times where religious freedom really saved some people and did some good things. It was not controversial. So there's a flip side of that I think they've missed in terms of their PR, their communications.
Well, the problem with that is that Mike Pence always said, I'm not for discrimination. I hate discrimination. I was there for the 45th anniversary of the March in Selma, and if I was in a restaurant and I saw that they weren't serving gay people, I would never eat there again. So his message on that point was always actually that no, I'm against discrimination. The problem was that it didn't match the language of the law and George Stephanopoulos' question regarding the gays. There was a disconnect between what he was saying and what was actually happening, and that disconnect was dissonant. And the problem was that if he had gone one way or the other 100%, he might have had his friends and his enemies, but at least he would have been credible. And the way that he approached this and the problem with this and why it blew up is because they tried to talk out of both sides of their mouths, and so the credibility issue, once that was blown up, then they had no leg to stand on. They physically couldn't defend their position anymore. And that's an issue we didn't really talk about, but that credibility angle, especially in PR, is super important. As long as you have it, you're good, but as soon as you lose it, good luck getting it back. And that's a major problem.
Yeah, you're making a great point, Olivia. Your actions have to match your words. For those public officials out there watching, any level of government, this is just so key. And Shell and Greg, we've talked about this on the show many times as well. And any other thoughts before we wrap up? This has been a great discussion, by the way. Anybody else want to close the loop? Anything?
Yeah, I just want to say I'm very sorry to believe that this won't lead future governors and legislatures to be proactive in anticipating crises from the acts that they introduce and pass and sign. I expect that this type of thing will happen again on a variety of issues because they do think that they can slip it by. I think corporations clearly do a better job at this than governments do, and that's not to say that business does a great job.
No, but corporations have more on the line. Power. Sure. Power has a tendency among those who hold it to seem infinite, and anybody who's run a public company knows that stock price changes every day.
Well, and sort of public opinion polls for politicians. So, and if they don't get reelected, we know what happens. So everything's about election. So similar, at least in that regard, I'd say. Okay.
No, it's not like Hillary Clinton handled the email situation a whole lot better, right?
Oh, she is, yeah, and it's continuing. I mean, there's still things coming out. Yeah, she's got problems, and we've done a show about that, and we'll probably do another show about it as it becomes.
So, are you saying that we need better PR people in politics?
Yes.
Because I definitely see an opportunity, a big one.
No, I am that good PR person in politics, and they don't listen. So what we need are better politicians.
See, what's really amazing about this show is that you can have, and I'll just go ahead and say it. I'm a Democrat. I mean, not that I really am, but that's where I lean, and have for some time. And we have a Republican, or at least a conservative, or libertarian, somewhere in there on the show. And we're not yelling at each other. We're actually making pretty decent points respectfully, and I'm actually agreeing with a lot of what my counterpart's saying. So that's pretty impressive, which is better than what I usually get on Facebook.
Remember that a lot. Oh, I'm sorry, Rich. I'm blabbing. Go ahead.
No, I just want to say thank you. That's what we try to do on the show. We try to be civil, right? Until we go off the air, then we yell at each other. No, the truth is we try to have opposing points of view and have intelligent discussion because it's a valid point. You don't always get that in the raging world we live in. Okay, Greg.
To Olivier's point, there are a lot of solutions for problems that folks from extreme opposite ends of the spectrum can sit down and solve. The elephant in the room is the sheer power and value of being in control of the government. It's so valuable. It's such an incredible rush personally, and it's so very rewarding financially that it's more important to nurse that than to solve the problem. If you solve the problem, you might not be in office anymore because the people might not perceive that you're needed, and that's why a lot of stuff doesn't get solved, at least in this consultant's opinion.
Totally agree. As I said, I worked in Albany, and as my poli-sci professor used to say, first you have to get reelected. Everything's based around that, and right. To your point. So great point. Okay, well, gentlemen, thank you so much. Greg Brooks from Las Vegas, Olivier Blanchard from South Carolina, and Shel Holtz from Concord, California. Thank you so much, gentlemen. It was a great discussion, and I know we'll be back soon. So to our viewers out there, if you want to look at the past 98 episodes of The Crisis Show, thecrisisshow.com. This show, for the first time tonight, you may have seen me holding my iPhone. I was not doing texting or anything. We're actually broadcasting on this new cool app called Periscope, and we're going to try to do this more often. I know, Shel, you had a piece on for immediate release about this just yesterday or the day before, which I haven't listened to yet, but I saw the headline. For those of you out there, check out Shel's podcast for immediate release. Periscope thing's kind of cool. We'll see how it works to reach out to other viewers around the world. If you want to tweet about anything you heard tonight, please use hashtag The Crisis Show. So from New York, Rich Klein saying thanks again for watching. Gentlemen, thank you so much for participating. I really appreciate it. Have a great day.
It was fun, Rich. Thanks.
Take care.
Yeah, bye-bye now.